there's a California law, Government Code Section 36502B, that talks about term limits, and one of your questions related to whether or not term limits, if we apply them, would be required to, could be retroactive or had to be applied respectively.
This is about that, right? This is just about that.
Yeah, this is about that, but it's also about the broader issues. So I'm going to start out just one of the earlier cases regarding term limits. Basically, it's number one. Younger versus Board of Supervisors held that county charters could not allow for term limits. They would be unconstitutional. However, city or charter cities could have term limits based on a doctrine called the Municipal Affair Doctrine. That's in the case, the Cowdrey case, the second one. And it basically said that term limits in a charter city are a matter of municipal concern, not of statewide concern. And what this did by bringing or making this decision is create sort of some question as to the applicability of Government Code Section 36502 to charter cities. Because what they're saying is that the legislature, it's not a statewide concern, it's a municipal concern, so the legislature cannot really control the manner in which the municipality does these things. So there's questions that developed at that point as to whether or not 36502 be applied, and whether or not that issue of prospective application or term limits is even something that the state legislature could address with respect to charter cities. There's another case, the next one, Wu versus Superior Court, that basically said if you're going to put language into a charter or into an initiative, it has to be very clear, because the court is going to interpret it exactly as it's written, and the only reason they wouldn't do that is if the results are absurd. And in this case, the results they thought were absurd because the exact interpretation would require 7 of the council members to step down right at that moment. So they said that couldn't possibly be what they meant at that time, because they wouldn't have had elections, they wouldn't have people to replace them, etc., etc. Next case was also similar, saying the language has to be clearly drafted, and the reason I'm going over this is because if we're going to put something in the language that I drafted, is based on some other charter sections or other initiative sections that have passed and have been approved that address, I think, the concerns that we want to address and are seen as sort of clear. So this language basically limited council members to 2 4-year terms. One of the council members was a woman who took over her husband's council seat. So she had a 17-month period, and then she ran for 2 other terms. And someone challenged and said, you've already had 2 terms. The court said, no, it says 2 4-year terms. She's only had 1 17-month term and 1 4-year term. So that's how we're going to interpret it. If it says 2 4-year terms, you get 2 4-year terms. So again, the language and how it's written is very important. And then again, this is the San Diego case in 05. Basically, if you say 2 consecutive 4-year terms, it doesn't mean life terms, it means consecutive. So if you take a break in between, you can come back and seek more terms. And that's sort of our issue here, is that we do have the ability to do consecutive terms and take breaks and come back.
Does the San Diego one prevent you from you have to take a break, so that would normally be like a 4-year break, right?
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be. It depends on, there's a vacancy. You know, say for instance, you go in, you do your 2 4-year terms, and then something happens that happened in the earlier case. One of the council members dies, or steps down, or something like that.
Historically, this hasn't been like a it hasn't been like just another year and they run for a different council seat. It's been like a couple of years, like 4 years.
Yeah, I don't know. Historically, I don't know, but this came up with the George Stevens thing.
Yeah.
Was the one
when Charles Lewis died, right?
Yeah. So I put in 2 sort of different suggestions. Each one does something slightly different. The first one basically says, no persons shall serve more than 2 full terms as a council member from any combination of districts or mayor. If a person serves a partial term in excess of 2 years, it shall be considered a full term for the purposes of this provision. Previous and current terms of office shall be counted for the purpose of applying this provision to future elections. All persons in the office at the time of the enactment of this provision shall be permitted to complete their present terms regardless of the number of terms previously served. So what that does is it allows them to finish out terms. If they're already termed out, they will not be able to run for new terms. It doesn't do that absurd result that happened in the one case where people get kicked out in the middle of a term. And then it basically starts from there. Anybody new coming in will only be allowed 2 terms. So if someone up until then is in office currently, they have 3 or they have 4, they're still allowed to finish up their term, but they won't run again. Now the next one basically takes into account a little bit of that question as to whether or not, a question that never completely got resolved, whether or not that government code section applies and how it would apply. This one basically allows the members in office to run for additional term, 1 additional term. So basically we put a term limit on them, but we don't let them do 2 term limits.
So neither one of these is a language to just say, okay, these are, you get 2, if you're a previous council member, to be able to come back and run for a full term and then say, okay, now that's it. Both of these are basically trying to make it retroactive, right?
Basically, anybody, these all say if you serve 2 terms, you can't serve anymore. The second one says if you've served 2 terms, but you're currently in office, the 2 terms aren't necessarily going to be counted and will let you run 1 more term.
What if you were a council member previously? So let's
they'll all count.
What's that?
Previous or current terms would count.
So it is, but
once
I'm saying, well, both of these are retroactive. I wanted one that would just say, because that was a question that this commission had, that should we make it retroactive, and that's something that Elizabeth actually asked,
Right.
that we should have one that was
Okay.
retroactive and one that wasn't retroactive.
Well, the second one isn't really fully, because basically what it does is it allows those council members currently in office to apply to have another term, which would be essentially like having 2 terms. But if you want, I mean, I can easily write one up that says, you know, starting, because all we would do is change for the purposes of this provision, the 2-year terms shall be counted for all terms after such and such date.
Yeah, because I think
And
that
that's-
Well, actually,
And just
Who was
take
it
out the
here?
other section.
who was our legal advice at our last meeting? It was a woman.
was.
What, was it you?
I was,
Well,
there were 2 people.
Oh, okay. Because when we spoke about it being retroactive, I thought it came out that it cannot be retroactive.
Well, they said they were going to look at it. That's one of the questions
Yeah.
that you had asked during the meeting. Can it be retroactive?
Yeah.
And that's why we asked them to come back with language for both.
And what I'm saying is basically the law that is currently out there suggests that the section of government code that talks about it can't apply prospectively may not apply to charter cities.
Oh, okay.
So we could apply it,
If we chose.
yeah, if we
So
chose
we should go
to.
we could retroactive this to the city council people that are in office right now
And the ones previous.
and the ones previous. So if they've run for 2 consecutive years like they are allowed to right now, correct?
Right,
Back to back, that's it, they're done.
that's what the first one does. Okay, the second one, basically it says no person may serve more than 2 full terms as council member from any combination of district or mayor. If a person serves a partial term, same language as before. These term limitations shall apply, there's the on, shouldn't be there, shall apply to terms of office that begin on or after. And that language would make it for perspective only. However, I had put a limitation here, and we could just get rid of that limitation for the question that you were talking about.
Well, I think that's a question for the commission to decide